Please take your seats. We are starting our works of this afternoon. Good afternoon, dear delegates. This afternoon, we will finalize our consideration of the last item on our agenda, item 7, biodiversity and climate change. After that, we will consider our first CRP documents, CRP1 on plant conservation, and CRP2 on review of findings from the methodological assessment report on the diverse values and valuation of nature of the IBES. Since yesterday's session on items 3 met from 7:30 to 11:30 p.m. It was co-chaired by Mr. Jan Plesnik from Czechia and Mr. Adams Toussaint from St. Lucia. I would like now to invite Mr. Plesnik of Czechia to provide us with a brief report on the progress. Jan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. The contact group on the item 3A, monitoring framework for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, met for the first time last night from 7:30 to 11 p.m. It was co-chaired by myself and my colleague Adam Toussaint of St. Lucia. One of the co-chairs of the ACTEC, Mr. James Williams, served as research person for the contact group, and I thank him for the valuable advice he provided to the contact group deliberations. The contact group deliberation included substantive requests to also to the highly professional secretariat staff assisting the group. During the contact group, 25 parties and 3 observers, but the parties with those divergent views have proposed a suggested way forward, so at this time the suggested recommendation contain clean text. The goal B indicator and related question B1, B2 and B3 were also considered. We heard diverging views and detailed interventions on the appropriate focus of the questions to enable efficient monitoring into the progress. Very significant progress in the next meeting of the contact group. That a different way forward will during framework presented in this non-paper. Chair, allow me some words without official statement. I would like really remind us that binary indicators are subset, very important, but still a subset of the indicators to be used to measure the progress in implementing GPF. And please, let's concentrate on the scientific, technical and technological issue, because it seems to me that it is not very appropriate if this distinguish scientific, technical and technological body deals say, yes, green light, or red light and why, or probably most often the amber. And lifetime, I apologize for saying the platitude, life is sometimes not so easy, but on the other hand, therefore we like it. And please remind us that this set of indicators will be visa for Kenya. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jan and Adams, for your report and the hard work. I fully agree with your views. Also, as former SBSTTA chair, we need to honor our group in terms that we should focus our deliberations on scientific and technical matters and to analyze the essence and the main questions in connection with the different targets to see if these targets. Binary indicators are a help when we don't have methodologies. We have to finish our work. We need to deliver at least this part. You know, the ATE has a lot of things to do. The website, building on the result of last night's discussions. It will take place in this room at 7:30. I wish you all the best, and please help you for your support, co-chairs and all participants. Dear colleagues, also this morning, the contact group on item 5, co-chaired by Ms. Senka Barutanovic from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Mr. Jean-Bruno Mikisa of Gabon, met from 10:30 a.m.
For keeping the approach simple, as it was this discussion. We have now clean text on all 6 annexes. Once again, I thank all delegates and Secretariat for their great support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for the good news. You were very scared at the beginning, so I'm happy to see that you have clean text in the 6 annexes, so this can be inserted to the CRP document to continue our deliberations. Thank you very much, and to all participants in this contact group. So we will see a complete document for CRP in deliberations in the next days. Now we will pick up where we left off yesterday at 6 p.m. with our consideration of item 7 on biodiversity and climate change. Before I open the floor for interventions, I would like to remind parties and observers to please upload your statements prior to taking the floor, to facilitate interpretation and to ensure your points are understood by everyone. Now I open the floor for intervention on the draft recommendations. Please try to avoid to give context. That don't waste 2 minutes and go straight to the
statement to the interpreters.
Yes, but still.
May contribute significantly to climate action. They do not replace the need for rapid, deep, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. For this reason, we note with deep concern some mentions in the recommendations contained in document 25/12, for example, in paragraph 3, that seem to shift the focus from fossil fuels, combustion, and industrial processes. In this regard, we draw attention to the contribution of Working Group 2 to the IPCC 6 assessment report that says, and I quote, that the term nature-based solutions is widely but not universally used in the scientific literature. It is a subject of ongoing debate with concerns that it may lead to the misunderstanding that NBS on its own can provide a global solution to climate change. Concerning paragraph 7, we remember that the outcome of the consultations on NBS will not be a negotiated task but a co-chair summary. Therefore, we think it's not adequate to request the Secretary to review and to provide guidance on the application of a document that was not negotiated and is not even ready yet. And finally, we fully support the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in this process, as mentioned in paragraph 4 and 8. As stated in the IPCC 6 assessment report, and I quote, cooperation and inclusive decision-making with indigenous peoples and local communities, as well as recognition of inherent rights of indigenous peoples, is integral to successful adaptation and mitigation across forests and other ecosystems. We will provide these comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I'll give the floor to Mexico, followed by Germany and Switzerland.
Gracias, señor presidente. Que brindan soluciones a los desafíos que enfrentan la biodiversidad en su conjunto frente a la amenaza que representa el cambio climático. Un ejemplo de lo anterior, y que México siempre ha favorecido, es el enfoque ecosistémico, que no solo contempla el manejo ecológico de los territorios biodiversos, sino que reconoce los derechos sociales, económicos y culturales en torno a dichos ecosistemas. México reconoce la interrelación de la pérdida de la biodiversidad, el cambio climático y la degradación del suelo, y se suma a la necesidad de contar con medidas urgentes en sinergia con el Acuerdo de París que apoyen la implementación del marco, anteponiendo el principio precautorio para establecer medidas que no permitan actividades de riesgo potencial para la biodiversidad. Hacemos un llamado para que la aplicación de medidas de adaptación, ya sea de soluciones basadas en la naturaleza o desde el enfoque ecosistémico sean diseñadas siempre considerando que los contextos locales sean tomados en cuenta, la participación de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias, México. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by Switzerland and European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Negotiations here in Nairobi. Germany together, not in isolation, to deliver both on the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreement. This exchange comes timely 6 weeks ahead of UNFCCC COP28. For Germany, the following points are central in the upcoming discussions on item 7. First, we need a better alignment between policies, strategies, and plans for enhanced biodiversity and climate action. Voluntary guidelines for the design and effect of DRR should also apply to ecosystem-based approaches to mitigation. Third, we regard those ecosystem-based approaches as part of the wide and inclusive umbrella term of nature-based solutions, since we would like to realize integrated action. Germany is a strong supporter and promoter of the ENACT initiative, joining Egypt on this, and was always a strong advocate for environmental and social safeguards for nature-based solutions, to ensure benefits for biodiversity and people and avoid misuse and greenwashing. Germany therefore supports the use of the IUCN Global Nature-Based Solution Standard and the Friends of Ecosystem-Based Adaptation EBA criteria, which are compatible. However, we understand that though some parties see the relation.
I'll give the floor to Switzerland, followed by EU and its.
Gracias, Señor Presidente. Switzerland considers the conclusion and the recommendations for consideration at COP16 contained in document 2512 to accurately reflect the views submitted by parties, and other stakeholders on this topic. COP as a tool, CCC, and climate action linked to the climate process. Nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches will be instrumental to progress on targets 8 and 11. We would welcome the review of the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions by UNEP, mentioned in paragraph 7, to provide further guidance on their application. Finally, Switzerland did participate in the Wilm European expert meeting and aligned itself with the recommendation of this expert group. In a few points, we added some text in order to be more concise, and we will hand in this text to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. I'll give the floor to EU, followed by UAE and China.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Science is clear. Climate change and biodiversity loss are interdependent and can only be addressed successfully in an integrated manner. An attempt to address these emergencies in isolation will lead to failure on both. Conservation, restoration and its sustainable use have been proved an effective contribution to addressing climate change. In fact, nature, terrestrial and marine ecosystems together have been absorbing roughly half of the anthropogenic CO2 emissions. Thus, ecosystems have buffered climate solutions, and ecosystem-based approaches are embedded into the revised national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and also into their reporting and planning processes, based and societal solutions to address the planetary emergency we are facing. The European Union supports the development of a supplement on ecosystem-based mitigation to the voluntary guidelines adopted in decision CBD COP14/5. Considering that the findings of the IPCC assessment report introduced under agenda item 4D are highly relevant in the context of biodiversity and climate, we would like to address these two agenda items jointly under agenda item 7. We think that it is important that considerations on IPCC are included in the draft recommendation for COP16. We find that the text as proposed by the CBD Secretariat is a good basis to start our work. However, we are of the view that it needs to be significantly strengthened. Our suggestions are inspired by the report of the experts meeting on the island of Wilm, which is available on the website of this meeting. We will submit them in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to United Arab Emirates and followed by China and New Zealand.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. دولة الإمارات تقدر الجهود المبذولة في إعداد هذه الوثيقة، ونشيد بما ذكر حيث تعمل دولة الإمارات في الوقت الحالي على تحديث استراتيجيتها الوطنية للتنوع البيولوجي وتضمين الحلول القائمة على الطبيعة فيها، بالإضافة إلى دمج هذه الأساليب أيضا في الخطة الوطنية للتكيف مع تغير المناخ، مما يعكس التزامنا في الحفاظ على التنوع البيولوجي والعمل المناخي. علاوة على ذلك، ولتعزيز التعاون الدولي في حماية التنوع البيولوجي والعمل من أجل المناخ، أطلقت الدولة تحالف المانغروف من أجل المناخ بالشراكة مع جمهورية إندونيسيا، والذي يهدف إلى دعم وتعزيز وتوسيع مساحة غابات القرم عالمياً والحد من آثارها السلبية من خلال زيادة الاستثمارات في الزراعة الذكية مناخياً والتقليل من الانبعاثات الضارة واحتجاز الكربون وزيادة الإنتاجية بشكل مستدام لإطعام عدد متزايد من سكان العالم ودعم المزارعين في الخطوط الأمامية ليكونوا قادرين على التأقلم والتكيف من آثار تغير المناخ. سيدي الرئيس، تتطلع دولة الإمارات لاستضافة مؤتمر الأطراف لاتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغيير المناخ والسعي حول تحقيق تقدم ملموس في العمل المناخي من أجل الحد من آثار تغير المناخ ودفع الجهود الدولية إلى تنفيذ التعهدات في الالتزام.
You're finished, right?
Yeah, I'm done. But
Okay.
United Kingdom can't use their mic. They're asking for the floor, and they requested if I can mention this for them. Thank you.
Go straight to the suggestions in order to have on time, because also we have two other documents to work in this session. I beg you for go straight to that part. I appreciate your cooperation. Now I'll give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Venezuela and Canada.
Biodiversity loss and the climate change global crises. In paragraph 6, New Zealand suggests we include a reference to the KMGBF after Article 20 and insert the word collective, so it would refer to collectively scaling up investments. In paragraph 7, we support the reference to the UNEA Resolution 5.5, which is an important guide to our implementation of nature-based solutions under the Convention. We also support taking note of the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on nature-based solutions undertaken last week. However, we think we need to edit the wording of this paragraph to clarify that it is the multilateral agreed UNEA resolution which is our core reference document, not the outcome of the intergovernmental consultations, which will be an information document. The UNEA resolution also includes important safeguards for climate action consistent with the elements of Target 8, which, for example, will help to ensure that the implementation of nature-based solutions will ensure respect for the contribution and rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Turning to the rest of the decision, New Zealand considers policy alignment between our climate change and biodiversity responses is essential to promote coherence, complementarity, and synergy in solving both crises. If we are to accelerate synergistic action, however, this is going to need the best available scientific knowledge, including to increase our understanding of the functional role of biodiversity in underpinning the integrity of ecosystems and ecosystem services, and how this can contribute to addressing both climate change and biodiversity loss. So after paragraph 8, we would suggest inserting 2 additional paragraphs saying, recognizing the importance of the best available science for effective and integrated biodiversity and climate action and policy, encourages IPBES and IPCC to continue to collaborate in the provision of relevant information to parties on the scientific, technical, and socioeconomic aspects of integrated approaches to biodiversity and climate change. We would also see potential in the value of the CBD supporting the invitation that has been made for a joint IPBES-IPCC report or assessment on biodiversity and climate change. We will
y el principal foro intergubernamental internacional para negociar la respuesta global al cambio climático. En este sentido, Venezuela reconoce que los efectos del cambio climático afectan a la biodiversidad en todos sus niveles y genera incertidumbre en torno a cómo diseñar las mejores estrategias de adaptación y mitigación, para lo cual es importante analizar detalladamente las oportunidades, limitantes y límites, así como los beneficios adicionales que pueden brindar estas medidas. Por tanto, en relación al proyecto de declaración, ya que estas consultas intergubernamentales sobre soluciones basadas en considerados en esta oportunidad. Gracias.
Gracias, Venezuela.
Firstly, Canada opportunities for cooperation with relevant organizations to advance recognition of the role of the ocean in regulating the climate. This is in line with Decision 1524 on marine and coastal biodiversity and outcomes of the 2023-2020 regional consulting and reversing biodiversity loss. Canada supports integrating nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches into NBSAP's other national planning processes, including existing that although the document detailing the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultations on NBS to be prepared for UNEA 6 is not available yet, we do have UNEA Resolution 55, which, as New Zealand noted, clearly defines nature-based solutions and provides in paragraph 7 to reviewing the guidance prepared by the Executive Secretary through a notification process. Regarding paragraph 8, Canada notes that COP15 include targets 8 and 11. In that vein, we think it would be pertinent to recall Decision 15.8 in the preambular paragraphs, and we question whether paragraph 8 is necessary. We will submit specific...
The rich discussion at COP15 about biodiversity and climate change, and this agenda item is crucial for taking action on both.
With UNEA in this regard. Mr. Chair, we will be submitting our submissions, which will be in the form of track changes and will also contain other changes that the group would like to introduce in the recommendation. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you to Swatini speaking on behalf of African states. Now I'll give the floor to Egypt, followed by Spain and Sweden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, Egypt strongly supports SBSTTA intervention on behalf of Africa, as well as other African delegates on this agenda item number 7. As you know, Mr. Chairman, previous CBD decisions have shown that there are urgent needs to tackle climate change and nature crisis in an integrated manner. That's through long-term strategies. Therefore, parties are encouraged to assess, manage, and avoid potential adverse effects and impacts on biodiversity, using the existing tools, especially those related to the ecosystem-based approach. Yes, indeed, we welcome the IPCC 6 assessment report, which states very clearly conserving and restoring ecosystems are feasible, effective, and low-cost options for climate change mitigation and adaptation. If we work together, we shall be able to achieve GBF targets 8 and 11 easily. Mr. Chair, I would like to bring the attention to the intervention by German colleague who referred to new partnerships between Egypt and Germany on nature-based solutions. This is well appreciated, and we hope such partnerships could help in resolving all of these issues related to the biodiversity conventions. Mr. Chair, we all aware of the UN General Assembly Resolution 76/300 on human rights to a clean and healthy environment. We know during the last few years, a large number of UN engineering field experiments have been implemented in many parts of our planet as means for climate change solutions. Therefore, all CBD parties attending this SBSTTA-25 should affirm precaution and prevent geoengineering from harming biodiversity, the environment, the climate, and the right of indigenous people and the human rights of local communities. We hope CBD Secretariat will be able to deal with this issue and report back to us on this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Egypt. Ahora doy la palabra a España, seguido de Suiza y Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. España trabaja para abordar los desafíos generados por la crisis climática y de pérdida de biodiversidad, buscando elevar el nivel de ambición y acotar el tiempo previsto para alcanzar los objetivos. Hacemos hincapié en la relación multidireccional del cambio climático y la biodiversidad y en poner en valor el papel de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y de los enfoques basados en ecosistemas para hacer frente a los retos ambientales, al tiempo que contribuyen a la conservación de la naturaleza y combaten la desertificación. En este sentido, España propondrá que se refleje en el texto la necesidad de una colaboración más estrecha entre IPBES, IPCC y también entre los diferentes convenios de Río. España desea animar a todas las partes a tomar en consideración las interacciones entre el cambio climático y la pérdida de biodiversidad para incorporarlas en los procesos nacionales de planificación, seguimiento, control y revisión, para nutrir las estrategias y planes de acción nacionales en materia de biodiversidad, las contribuciones determinadas a nivel nacional y las estrategias a largo plazo y planes de adaptación. España trabajará junto con las partes para que SBSTTA-25 proponga una decisión suficientemente ambiciosa para consideración y adopción en la COP16. Finalmente, informamos que España propone explorar las diferentes fuentes de financiación para abordar el cambio climático y la pérdida de biodiversidad de forma conjunta, asegurando que la pluralidad de actores involucrados en el tratamiento de ambos retos, desde el sector privado hasta las poblaciones indígenas y las comunidades locales, pueden contribuir a esa movilización necesaria de recursos. Hemos hecho llegar nuestras propuestas concretas de enmienda por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, España. Pues sigue la lista con cerca de 40 solicitudes para la palabra. Y sigo escuchando el tratar de ser incluyentes en considerar distintas alternativas y herramientas para abordar el cambio climático. Se habla de restauración, se habla de soluciones basadas en naturaleza, se habla de enfoques basados en ecosistemas, se habla de financiación, restauración, distintos elementos, la colaboración con IPBES, con IPCC, incluso también con las convenciones de Río. Tratemos de entrar a la parte técnica en nuestra recomendación y no tanto una discusión política. Si diferimos las discusiones políticas para la COP, quizás sea mejor. Y todavía hay muchas solicitudes. Si no da tiempo a dar la palabra a algunos observadores, espero que comprendan cuál es la situación, porque también tenemos que abordar otros dos documentos. Si no, vamos a tener que diferir más trabajo en plenaria. Ayúdenme, por favor, para que todos tengan la oportunidad de expresar sus opiniones. Doy la palabra a Suecia, seguido de Argentina y Gabón.
Thank you, Chair. Biodiversity and climate change solutions and challenges are intimately interconnected. Trade-offs should be avoided and synergies sought, as recognized in Target 8 of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. Picking up where we left off under Agenda Item 4, Sweden welcomes a balanced reflection of the biodiversity-relevant findings of IPCC AR6 within a SBSTTA-25 recommendation under this agenda item. This means that besides the significant impact of climate change on biodiversity and ecosystem services, Sweden recognizes the important role of conservation and restoration, nature-based solutions, and ecosystem-based approaches for climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction, increasing resilience to climate change impacts, and for climate change mitigation. In the SBSTTA-25 recommendations, Sweden supports implementing strong social and environmental safeguards when taking action to implement GBF Targets 8 and 11, and promotes a human rights-based approach and the full and effective participation of rights holders in line with GBF Target 22. As co-chair of the Bern 3 Conference on Cooperation among the Biodiversity related conventions for the implementation of the GBF, Sweden lifts the potential of deeper cooperation between the CBD and the UNFCCC, as well as the Third Rio Convention, the UNCCD. Sweden emphasizes, in particular, that achieving the goals and mission of the Kunming-Montreal GBF is not possible without urgent and effective action on climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, and vice versa. Sweden encourages further IPES-IPCC interaction when relevant. These panels' science-based, policy-oriented work provides an underpinning of well-founded measures taken to address climate change and biodiversity challenges and their links to other crises. Chair, like Spain and others, Sweden supports robust SBSTTA-25 recommendations under this agenda item. We capture our approach in detailed written comments, which are broadly aligned with the Vilm report. Thank you.
Gracias. Doy la palabra a Argentina, seguida de Gabón, Australia y Sudáfrica.
Gracias, señor presidente. Argentina, como signataria del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica y la Convención sobre Cambio Climático, reafirma su compromiso con la biodiversidad y el combate contra el cambio climático. Con relación al proyecto de recomendación, la Argentina recuerda que el mandato de la COP se limita a la revisión de las visiones de las partes en relación a biodiversidad y cambio climático. Con esto en mente, deseamos realizar las siguientes sugerencias de modificación. Primero, la Argentina mantiene su posición en relación a la mención específica al taller copatrocinado por IPES e IPCC sobre biodiversidad y cambio climático. Consideramos que la COP15 y previas reuniones de SBSTTA han agotado el debate al respecto y no sería necesario retomar esa discusión en esta oportunidad. Segundo, consideramos que el proyecto de recomendación debe reflejar adecuadamente los desafíos interdependientes de la pérdida de biodiversidad, el cambio climático, la desertificación y la degradación del suelo, entre muchos otros desafíos ambientales interconectados que enfrentamos. Asimismo, consideramos que el abordaje de estos desafíos debe considerar la particular estructura legal del multilateralismo ambiental. En este sentido, el abordaje de las relaciones entre biodiversidad y cambio climático debe ser coherente y no necesariamente integrado. En tercer lugar, el reconocimiento de la interdependencia entre cambio climático y la pérdida de biodiversidad. La Argentina apoya señalar que las contribuciones de la biodiversidad al cambio climático son relevantes. En cuarto lugar, tenemos propuestas de modificación respecto a las acciones que deben llevar a cabo las partes para permitir adaptabilidad y flexibilidad en la implementación de las estrategias nacionales. En quinto lugar, y en cuanto al financiamiento, es crucial recalcar las obligaciones de los países desarrollados. Proponemos enfocar este punto en la implementación del CBD y retirar referencias a otros actores interesados para enfatizar la responsabilidad primaria de las partes del convenio. Finalmente, solicitamos conocer cómo se implementaría la solicitud para revisar los resultados de las consultas intergubernamentales sobre soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. En nuestro entendimiento, dichas consultas no tuvieron resultados formales, dado que no existía un mandato al respecto. Creemos que estas modificaciones refinarán y fortalecerán nuestras acciones colectivas para preservar la biodiversidad y combatir el cambio climático. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Argentina, y gracias por ir directo a las recomendaciones. Ahora doy la palabra a Gabón, seguido de Australia, Sudáfrica y Kuwait.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et bonsoir, chers collègues. Monsieur le Président, le Gabon intervient d'abord pour appuyer la déclaration du groupe africain faite par Eswatini et aussi pour appuyer le contenu des recommandations qui sont formulées dans le document CDB-SBSTTA-25-12, car les crises de la biodiversité et du climat sont étroitement liées et s'accentuent mutuellement. Tout en maintenant, effectivement, la réserve qui a été faite par Eswatini en ce qui concerne les recommandations 7 et 8. Monsieur le Président, dans votre résumé, vous avez pris en compte l'ensemble des préoccupations formulées dans la déclaration du Gabon, donc je ne vais pas revenir là-dessus. Et pour l'économie des temps, je vais juste insister sur deux éléments. Le premier élément, c'est que nous devons prendre en compte les questions de changement climatique au-delà des cibles 8 et 11 si nous voulons réellement réaliser pleinement les objectifs du cadre mondial biodiversité Kunming-Montréal. Dans cette perspective, nous pensons que l'intégration des considérations champs mathématiques doivent aussi se lire sous le prisme de la cible 2 et 4. Et la seconde idée, c'est que si nous voulons réellement considérer ces questions d'interaction entre les changements climatiques et la biodiversité, il est de notre avis important de réaliser une analyse des lacunes relatives à la prise en compte de ces considérations en ce qui concerne la mise en œuvre du cadre mondial biodiversité Kunming-Montréal. Voici, Monsieur le Président, l'économie de nos déclarations, puisque dans votre résumé, vous avez déjà pris en considération tout ce que nous voulions dire. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Gabon. I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by South Africa, Kuwait, and Nigeria.
Thank you, Chair. Like Canada, Australia seeks text changes to paragraph 6 to bring biodiversity action up front and better reflect that CBD finance should primarily focus on biodiversity action first, with climate mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. The current wording is potentially misleading in the context of this forum, as it infers that the CBD finance should be pushed towards any or all climate mitigation and adaptation action, which could include biodiversity action. We will submit our proposed amendment directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now South Africa, followed by Kuwait, Nigeria, and Equatorial Guinea.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports and endorses the statement made by Eswatini on behalf of Africa. South Africa is concerned that only 26 submissions were received by the Secretariat from 8 parties and 18 international organizations, as highlighted by the note from the Secretariat. South Africa is of the view that a greater number of submissions would have greatly enriched the depth of ideas and inputs for the process. Chair, the mandate of this convention is to manage biodiversity and ecosystems in a way that enhances structural integrity and function in order to mount resilience against climate change and to deliver the goods and services that sustain livelihoods across the globe. Given the latter, the focus should be on enhancing and scaling up on ecosystem-based approaches and disaster risk reduction measures to monitor and report results of projects implemented post the adoption of EBA. The Working Group 2 report of the IPCC's sixth assessment report highlighted the following aspects about nature-based solutions. First is that there is a need for an assessment framework on the effectiveness and efficiency of nature-based solutions in providing ecosystem and benefits to society. The second is that the evidence base for nature-based solutions has substantial gaps, and most of the evidence is from the global north. And lastly, there is also a lack of robust site-specific investigations of the effectiveness of the interventions compared to other alternative approaches which are more holistic in nature and provide more social and ecological benefits. In addition, Chair, South Africa has just finished a detailed scientific assessment of nature-based solutions, advantages, and factors determining its potential success in the context of our country. The results are very much in agreement with the IPCC's assessment, with other additional gaps highlighted. Furthermore, there is a need to understand the thresholds and limits of nature-based solutions under various climate scenarios of a world that is 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, and 3 degrees Celsius warmer, respectively. It is clear, Chair, that we are nowhere near a consensus on the concept of nature-based solutions, as alluded to by many countries. Given this, South Africa supports Eswatini's statement on behalf of Africa to defer paragraphs 7 and 8 of the recommendations until there is a globally agreed set of guidelines for the implementation of nature-based solutions. We will submit our text proposals together with this intervention. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Now is it turn to Kuwait, followed by Nigeria, Equatorial Guinea, and Cuba.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. أن دولة الكويت تقدر الجهود المبذولة في التصدي لظاهرة تغير المناخ وتأثيره على التنوع البيولوجي والتخفيف من آثاره، وتعمل دولة الكويت تضمين الحلول القائمة على الطبيعة في استراتيجيتها الوطنية للتنوع البيولوجي، مما يعكس التزامنا في الحفاظ على التنوع البيولوجي والعمل المناخي. ومن ضمن خطوات تعزيز التعاون الدولي في حماية التنوع البيولوجي والعمل من أجل المناخ، فقد أبدت دولة الكويت تأييدها لكل من المبادرة الخضراء التي تقدمت بها المملكة العربية السعودية وتحالف القرم من أجل المناخ الذي أطلقته دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة. كما تم اتخاذ عدد من الخطوات في سبيل مواجهة ظاهرة التغير المناخي والتقليل من فقدان التنوع البيولوجي، منها إنشاء عدد من المحميات الطبيعية البرية والبحرية. كما تم تنفيذ عدد من المشاريع التي تهدف إلى زيادة الرقعة الخضراء في دولة الكويت باستزراع الأنواع النباتية الفطرية ومنها نباتات السدر والمانغروف، بهدف مواجهة التغيرات المناخية والحد من الآثار السلبية على التنوع البيولوجي. كما نشدد على التآزر مع الاتفاقية الإطارية للمناخ، وذلك للخروج بأفضل الحلول لتقليل الآثار السلبية على التنوع الأحيائي. وسيتم إرسال مداخلتنا وتعليقاتنا إلى السكرتارية. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Kuwait. Now, Nigeria, followed by Equatorial Guinea, Cuba, and Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. Nigeria would like to welcome the note from the Secretariat on this agenda item, which provides an overview of the findings of the assessment that are relevant to biodiversity and their linkages for the work under the Convention, especially on the 6th Assessment Report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and the report of the IPBES IPCC Biodiversity and Climate Change Workshop. Nigeria would like to acknowledge the IPBES report that recognizes the linkages between climate change and biodiversity loss. We would like to have a clear reference to the IPBES report on the recommendations under this agenda item. We would like to emphasize on the need to explore connections between climate change and biodiversity. We are concerned about the accelerating impact of climate change on biodiversity and on the capacity of ecosystems to provide their functions and services, including for climate adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction, and about the serious implication of these findings for the work under the Convention. We welcome the recommendation noting UNEA Resolution 5x5 on implementing NBS for sustainable development and its potential in providing guidance to the implementation of Target 8 and 11 of the KMGBF. Thank you very much. Okay, Nigeria would like to recommend that this should be the reference point for paragraph 7 rather than the just concluded IGC on NBS, which will only produce an information document to UNEA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigeria. Now, Guinea Equatorial, followed by Cuba, Belgium, and Sudan.
Muchísimas gracias, señor presidente. La República de Guinea Ecuatorial adopta la posición del Grupo Africano presentado por el Reino de Eswatini sobre la integración del cambio climático y la biodiversidad y acoge con beneplácito los aspectos evocados en las recomendaciones, sobre todo en lo relativo a la publicación del 6º informe del IPCC. Y como sabemos, los países parte de la biodiversidad también están en proceso de elaboración de su 7º informe. Y creo, señor presidente, que con la sinergia de esos dos instrumentos es un valor añadido en tanto que convenciones hermanas de Río, lo cual ayudaría, por una parte, a mitigar los efectos adversos del cambio climático, así como la conservación y el uso sostenible de la biodiversidad, ya que, señor presidente, el bucle entre cambio climático y biodiversidad es inherente y está técnicamente demostrado. Sin embargo, la realidad sobre el terreno es otra, ya que la mayoría de los países detentores de esta rica biodiversidad y que son los grandes guardianes y protectores del planeta, son efectivamente los que están más expuestos a los efectos del cambio climático y son en su mayoría países subdesarrollados, los cuales tienen dificultades técnicas económicas para diseñar y poner a disposición políticas que se adecúen al contexto actual. Señor presidente, Guinea Ecuatorial concluye sugiriendo que lo evocado en la recomendación 6 del documento 2512 se reformule y que no sea una simple forma de alentar a las partes en aumentar sus inversiones, sino que sea algo totalmente vinculante a los países de anexo 1 referente al cambio climático para que estos asuman más responsabilidad respecto a los países de no anexo 1. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Guinea Ecuatorial. Ahora doy la palabra a Cuba, seguida de Bélgica, Sudán y Corea.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is made on behalf of Small Islands Development State attending in this meeting. I must add that Peru also supports this statement. The Small Island Development State present welcome the publication of the 6th Assessment Report, or the IPCC, the IPBES IPCC co-sponsored workshop on biodiversity and climate change and its workshop report, and would like to thank the Secretariat for the work in the preparation of the document on biodiversity and climate change that we are discussing right now. The IPBES IPCC co-sponsored workshop on biodiversity and climate report recognized that we must limit global warming in order to protect biodiversity and achieve sustainable, equitable benefits for all people, providing a suitable habitat for all nature. We note that the achievement of the goal and mission of the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is inextricably linked to urgent and effective action on climate change as a direct driver of biodiversity loss. Biodiversity underpins the integrity and stability of ecosystems. It is the foundation on which long-term carbon storage in ecosystem is built. Retaining and recovering biodiversity is essential for retaining and recovering ecosystem integrity and carbon stocks. Further, the IPCC 6th Assessment Report has indicated that protection, improved management, and restoration of forests, wetlands, savannas, grassland, and other ecosystems can have the largest potential to sequester carbon. For many decades, relevant international scientific institutions have recognized the effects of constant increase of temperatures on the sea level rise around the world, and how these consequences are already affecting the existing ecosystem in our low-lying coastal country. In its 6th report that refers in that decision, IPCC gives more inputs about these climate change impacts over our coastal line. In line with Article 20 of the Convention, for SITS is crucial the scale of investment directly for restoring a protection ecosystem according to the actions previously defined in our MBSAP. And we also recognize the co-benefits of this intervention to climate change resilience. So, it is also required to make the arrangement to avoid double accountability in the provision of financial resources in climate change versus biodiversity. Regarding intergovernmental consultation on nature-based solutions, we appreciate a lot effort from the UNEP Secretary and the distinguished co-chair from Costa Rica and Nigeria, and we affirm our vision that a long way should be walked first. So, we are agreed that the Secretary of CTV, taking into consideration this UNEP process, works with member states in the logical insertion of NBS in function of implementation of Target 8. We will submit edits of the document to the Secretariat with proposal in paragraph 4, 6, and 7, according to our statement. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias, Cuba. Now I need your cooperation because there's still more than 30 requests to the floor, and we need to have established limits and to move on. I have a list of parties and observers. I will name the parties. After Cuba is Belgium, Sudan, Korea, DRC, Finland, UK, France, Colombia, Cook Islands, Chad, Netherlands, Benin, Lebanon, Norway, Costa Rica, India, Italy, and Russia. So I would like to close the list. Otherwise, this will definitely we will need to establish a contact group, given that so many changes to the 8 paragraphs we have in the recommendation. And I feel very bad to close options for observers. I will limit to few interventions from observers, from IPLCs, UNDRR, IUCN, Ramsar, Youth, Women, and one of NGOs to move forward. I apologize for other participants that like to take the floor, but we need to have a limit. We need to have space also to continue working with the following documents. Anyway, we need to establish a contact group. There will be opportunity there to move on. So please count with your support to be precise on recommendations once again. We know it's important, this topic. I made a summary of the main points that have been heard, including recognition to marine ecosystems. This is something new, and we mainly have a political discussion between nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. I believe any action that can help to address climate change in support of biodiversity should be welcome, but this is my opinion. It's up to you how to proceed. So I invite you to be concrete and to send good advice to the Conference of the Parties in how to address this topic in the light of our framework, our new framework, please. Now with this, I'll give the floor to Belgium, followed by Sudan, Korea, and DRC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the documents provided and for the draft recommendations, which are a good basis for further work. And I would ask for your indulgence. The points that I will raise are points that are linked to amendments that we will send in, or points which are already in the text, which we feel are important to highlight in order to make sure that they're not disappearing. We would like to highlight the following 4 elements from the submission. First, the impact of climate change, but also, of course, the impact of climate action on biodiversity. Thirdly, also the role of biodiversity to address climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. And fourthly, the importance of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches in this regard. And we find it important to address these elements in recommendations from this subset for adoption at COP16. Belgium shares the conclusion in the note from the Secretariat that new or updated guidance could be prepared, taking into account the variety of actors which are involved and the value of diverse knowledge and values, and the need for coherence, complementarity, and synergy in the work undertaken under the Convention and related processes. Furthermore, like many others have mentioned here, we would like to emphasize the need to avoid working in silos for addressing climate change and biodiversity loss, advocating instead for a holistic approach that maximizes synergies, also with other challenges such as desertification, land degradation, and pollution. For that reason, Belgium strongly supports that nature-based solutions for sustainable development, as defined by UNEA, and also ecosystem-based approaches are embedded into the revised national biodiversity strategies and action plans, the nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and other long-term strategies, as has been reflected in paragraph 4b. In that regard, I would also like to add that Belgium is taking a lot of initiative on nature-based solutions for adaptation and resilience, and that we are honored to mention that we will join the Egyptian ENACT initiative. On agenda item 4D regarding IPCC findings, we believe that it would be useful to have their recommendations integrated into the ones for this agenda item for adoption at COP16, and we support the continuation and reinforcement of the cooperation between IPBES and the IPCC, of course avoiding any duplication of work and aiming for a holistic approach. Furthermore, we would like to request for a compilation of information on carbon and biodiversity credits and offsets and other approaches, and their effects on biodiversity. This to allow for a well-informed exchange of views on these concepts at SBSTTA prior to COP17. Finally, Belgium would like to request to bring these recommendations to the attention of their UNFCCC and UNCCD counterparts in order to discuss it in the context of the joint liaison group of the Rio Conventions and to assess options for better integration, including consideration for establishing a joint work program to operationalize the integration
Please
in
conclude.
future COPs. I will send in my comments in writing. Thank you very much.
I'll give the floor to Sudan, followed by Korea and DRC.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. السودان يدعم بيان إسواتيني نيابة عن أفريقيا فيما يتعلق بالروابط بين التنوع البيولوجي وتغير المناخ. نقترح تشجيع الدول الأطراف في اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي واتفاقية الأمم المتحدة لمكافحة التصحر واتفاقية الأمم المتحدة الإطارية بشأن تغير المناخ على القيام بعمل على المستوى الوطني في تآزر تأكيداً لتعزيز جهود التنوع البيولوجي وتدهور الأراضي والمناخ لبعضها البعض وتجنب الآثار السلبية التي يمكن أن تنشأ من أي أعمال على التنوع البيولوجي. وفي نفس الوقت نتطلع لبناء قدرات الدول النامية والدول الجزرية والدول التي اقتصاداتها في مرحلة التحول من أجل العمل في تآزر مع بعضها البعض، مع علمنا أن اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي قد بذلت جهدا كبيرا في هذا المجال. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you very much, Sudan. Now Korea, followed by DRC and Finland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Secretary for their work on this important matter. Korea recognizes that biodiversity and climate change are intricately linked. It is important to integrate climate change consideration when implementing the GBF. In particular, action to directly support Target 8 and 11 and indirectly Target 2, 4, and 12. Last week's consultations on nature-based solutions, many countries highlighted the need for well-defined criteria, standards, and guidelines for MBS in alignment with biodiversity and ecosystem conservation and restoration. Our view is that the MBS and the ecosystem-based approach can address climate change issues and other societal problems, acting as a key connector between efforts to mitigate climate impacts and to conserve biodiversity. Therefore, we welcome the draft recommendation which requests the Secretary to review the outcomes of the intergovernmental consultation on MBS under UNEA. In particular, the call for clear and comprehensive standards, guidelines, and safeguards for the MBS actions in order to scale up the MBS implementation in strong alignment with biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, to be shared among relevant international conventions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Korea. Now the floor, DRC, followed by Finland and UK.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole. La République démocratique du Congo soutient très fortement la déclaration faite par les Swatini au nom du groupe africain. Monsieur le Président, des activités anthropiques fortement poussées par les besoins de développement technologique et industriel a eu pour corollaire les changements climatiques. Ces derniers influent négativement sur la biodiversité. Cela étant, l'intégration entre la biodiversité et les changements climatiques devra être largement promise, y compris en ce qui concerne la mobilisation des ressources et la collaboration entre l'IPBES et les GIEC. Au paragraphe 2 du document sous examen, il nous a paru curieux de voir qu'il est uniquement fait mention du rapport des GIEC, sans faire mention du travail de l'IPBES à ce sujet, qui est pourtant la plateforme de la Convention sur la biodiversité. La République démocratique du Congo est d'avis que les cibles 2, 3, 8, 11, 18 et 19 du cadre mondial de la biodiversité connu Montréal sont particulièrement pertinentes pour mettre en lumière les actions visant à lutter contre l'érosion et freiner la biodiversité et les effets néfastes des changements climatiques. Au point G de ces documents, la RDC estime que la création des fonds spéciaux dédiés à la biodiversité sous l'autorité de la Convention sur la diversité biologique, en vertu des articles 20, 21 et 39 de la Convention sur la diversité biologique, s'avère indispensable pour amplifier les investissements et les soutiens financiers en faveur de la biodiversité, en vue notamment d'accroître les capacités de résilience des êtres vivants aux effets des changements climatiques. Monsieur le Président, l'homme patient mange des fruits mûrs, dit-on. La RDC pense qu'il est encore trop tôt de transposer entièrement les solutions basées sur la nature dans les actions en faveur de la conservation de la biodiversité, car ce processus est encore en pleine évolution et le concept n'a pas encore été amplement négocié dans toutes ses dimensions. Si ces solutions sont admises par la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, elles ont encore un parcours à faire pour l'être dans le cadre de la Convention sur la diversité biologique. La prudence voudrait que nous puissions d'abord bien affermir les approches basées sur les écosystèmes, déjà bien développées et agréées, avant d'embrasser les solutions fondées sur la nature, qui souffrent encore du manque de lignes directrices et autres précisions de taille. Cela étant, et en l'absence d'un consensus sur les solutions fondées sur la nature au stade actuel, nous vous serions reconnaissants de supprimer les paragraphes 7 et 8 du projet de recommandation. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, ERC. Now give the floor to Finland, followed by UK and France.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, Finland supports the intervention made by New Zealand. Finland appreciates and recognizes the valuable work done and the recent findings from reports by the IPBES and IPCC and the ongoing joint activities. It is undeniably clear that we are not on track to meet the emissions reduction targets, nor are we doing enough to stop biodiversity loss that is happening at an alarming speed. We would like to stress that biodiversity loss and climate change are mutually reinforcing and share many of the same drivers. We need joint actions to address this crisis of our times. If we fail to do this, the results are irreversible consequences for the planet and its people. Finland therefore proposes that the substance sends a strong message about the urgency to step up efforts and implementation to address climate change and biodiversity loss in an integrated manner. It is important to strengthen synergies between the Rio Conventions, biodiversity-related conventions, and other relevant environmental conventions. All countries must update and mainstream these targets into their nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, as well as the MBSAPs and the overall implementation of the GPF. This includes also aligning the financial flows and making them consistent with our targets. We should in particular address threats to vulnerable areas impacted by climate change, such as mountains, coastal and marine ecosystems, and those situated in small island states, the Arctic and the Antarctic. Climate change is by far the worst threat to the Arctic biodiversity. This has consequences for people and communities that are directly dependent on ecosystem services and functions. Therefore, it is important to enable full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth in designing and implementing measures for adaptation, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction. Finland promotes nature-based solutions, especially ecosystem restoration, with social and environmental safeguards. These are at the heart of reaching our targets. They offer a feasible and cost-effective way to increase much-needed mitigation, resilience, and adaptation while generating multiple co-benefits for nature and society. We have amendments to the recommendations, and we will give the detailed text proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Give the floor to UK, followed by France and Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. The UK is grateful to the Executive Secretary for preparing this draft decision. We feel it is vital that we agree a strong decision given the importance of these interdependent challenges. We would like to share our views on this decision and our proposed amendments, which we have also submitted in writing. The interlinkages between biodiversity and climate change are multifaceted and multidirectional. We also feel that the findings from the IPCC Sixth Assessment Report detailed in document Subsidiary-25/9 should be integrated into this decision rather than a standalone decision under Agenda Item 4 to ensure that actions are underpinned by evidence. Action and science should not be treated separately. It is vital that this decision supports the implementation of Targets 8 and 11. As such, we support the request to the Executive Secretary, currently in the draft decision, to produce guidance for these targets for consideration at COP16. This should be moved to Substa so work can begin immediately and should be informed by a broader range of sources, including the UNEA Resolution 5/5, as stated by a number of parties. We share the views of Germany and the EU regarding the importance of the voluntary guidelines of ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and our regret that an equivalent does not exist for mitigation. As such, we are also requesting the Executive Secretary to update these guidelines to consider mitigation. Unlike the guidance for Targets 8 and 11, which will be aimed at parties to the CBD, these broader guidelines would be highly valuable to practitioners, organisations, and other activities related to the implementation of nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches, including those under other conventions such as the UNFCCC. Finally, we feel this decision should promote synergies with and between other conventions, scientific bodies, and activities related to biodiversity and climate change, to ensure these challenges are addressed in an integrated manner. We are supportive of the elements in the draft decision and those proposed by others, including Canada and New Zealand, that aim to do this and are proposing additional elements, including inviting the UNFCCC to consider the voluntary guidelines, as well as the IPCC and IPBES to consider the design and implementation of nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches in their work programme. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UK. Just to let you know, and in order to save number of documents, I had conversations with the Secretariat and going with the idea to integrate documents, those documents from IPBES with invasive species. I guess we can do that with climate change and also sustainable use, to have in a single place this thing and to save time, but I need your help, please. Please go to comments on recommendations. I still listen to a lot of context. Everybody wants to work together, to be inclusive, to consider IPCC, to consider IPBES. We've been listening to this many times, and I hope you can focus on the recommendations. We have ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solutions, support, and not support to this. Maybe just to be very clear with you, maybe we will have, this is more a political discussion rather than technical from my point of view. We will end probably with one paragraph making reference to nature-based solutions in brackets and maybe other elements. So we all together want to address this. So let's try to focus and to be very clear, considering what will be the end of this, trying to be more technical. Seems we're more in a discussion, a political discussion, rather than really technical. We want to consider adaptation, mitigation, restoration, different ecosystems, including Arctics. So we need to put this all together, but I want to see something really parties are doing to address biodiversity and the harm of climate change. Sorry about that, but we need to move on. This is very precious time. We have translation in 6 languages. We need to move on, and we are like in cycles, having more political discussions. Please help me to do this. I'm in your hands. Now I give the floor to France, followed by Colombia and Cook Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France salue le document présenté par le secrétariat et vous remercie pour le travail de synthèse effectué suite aux consultations sur le lien entre biodiversité et changement climatique, qui résulte d'un processus inclusif et transparent. Les recommandations proposées constitue une bonne base de discussion sur ce sujet qui constitue une priorité pour la France. Dans le contexte de la mise en œuvre du cadre mondial pour la biodiversité, il est important que cet organe subsidiaire prépare une décision ambitieuse sur le sujet en se concentrant sur ses dimensions scientifiques et techniques. À ce titre, la France souhaiterait s'associer à d'autres délégations ayant pris la parole et proposer certains amendements aux recommandations proposées avec les objectifs suivants. Renforcer les synergies entre les actions de préservation de la biodiversité et de lutte contre les changements climatiques en matière d'adaptation, d'atténuation et de réduction des risques de catastrophes. Renforcer les liens entre les travaux de l'IPBES et du GIEC, ainsi qu'avec les conventions de Rio. Accueillir la définition des solutions fondées sur la nature, telle qu'agréée par la 5e Assemblée des Nations Unies pour l'environnement. Souligner la vulnérabilité, mais aussi le rôle particulier des écosystèmes forestiers et marins face aux défis interdépendants des changements climatiques et de la perte de biodiversité. Limiter l'impact négatif des actions de maladaptation sur la biodiversité et sur les écosystèmes, notamment via des trajectoires de décarbonation compatibles avec la préservation de la biodiversité. Et enfin, préserver les corridors écologiques et maintenir la connectivité pour les espèces migratrices dans le contexte des changements climatiques. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Franz. Doy la palabra a Colombia, sigue de Cook Islands and Chad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This statement is made on behalf of Colombia, Costa Rica, Chile, Mexico, República Dominicana, and Peru to emphasize that our country are currently facing the associated problems of biodiversity loss, climate change, and desertification. Therefore, these challenges must be addressed in a comprehensive manner, making it as a priority to articulate the climate and biodiversity agendas to ensure complementary efforts for sustainable development and to include in the long-term strategies nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches for climate change and its effects, disaster risk reduction, and mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. In this regard, we suggest increase global climate ambition by putting biodiversity and indigenous and local communities at the forefront, establish joint action plans between NBSAPs and NDCs, provide urgent signals of biodiversity conservation status to be included in the global stocktake. In this context, it is important to highlight the need for technical and financial support so that the countries can implement our strategies for the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of biological diversity, given the contribution of ecosystems to mitigation and adaptation of climate change. We also support the statement made by Cuba on behalf of small island states on the topic of the intergovernmental consultation of nature-based solutions. Besides of that, Colombia has some specific comments on the text that we are going to share with the Secretary. Thank you.
Gracias, Colombia. Ahora Cook Islands, seguido de Chad y Países Bajos.
Thank you, Chair. The Cook Islands is speaking on behalf of the Pacific Island countries in attendance today and would like to align ourselves with New Zealand and Cuba on behalf of the small island developing states. Chair, we would like to note the following. 1, we welcome and support the recommendations under CBD/Substa/25/12. 2, Indigenous peoples and local communities have a wealth of knowledge and expertise when it comes to sustainably managing the environment. The role of traditional knowledge and practices must therefore be recognized, given due respect, and incorporated into appropriate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction actions to increase resilience to climate change. We welcome the full participation of IPLCs in achieving all of the GBF targets. 3, technical capacity and resources are limited in the Pacific. We echo the need to scale up investments to facilitate rapid implementation of the targets, as noted in paragraphs 6 and 8 of Section 4, and therefore encourage financial flow from developed to developing countries to further support this. 4, we recognize that nature-based solutions are not a substitute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and implore developed countries and industries to urgently reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to minimize negative impacts of climate change on biodiversity. Lastly, it is crucial to bridge the gaps between climate change and biodiversity programs and actions, to streamline climate consideration into the implementation of the GBF. Solutions to the identified gaps and approved actions must be integrated within national policy frameworks to optimize co-benefits and ensure that our biodiversity is safeguarded to slowly adapt to climate change. Our full statement has been submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Chad, followed by Netherlands and Benin.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La République du Tchad soutient la déclaration faite par Eswatini pour le compte du groupe africain et les déclarations spécifiques de chacun des pays d'Afrique. Par ailleurs, pour le Tchad, l'une des conséquences des changements climatiques à mettre en exergue est aussi la question de la transhumance, dont ces amplitudes vont croissantes avec de multiples effets, d'où la nécessité de prendre en compte dans les projets de décision des stratégies en vue de consolider et de renforcer la résilience des pratiques d'élevage intelligentes et adaptées. Monsieur le Président, les effets de ces changements climatiques touchent aussi des groupes vulnérables, parmi lesquels les communautés africaines, qui possèdent des trésors de connaissances sur la biodiversité des régions qu'elles habitent depuis plusieurs générations et appliquent des méthodes qui ont fait leur preuve en matière d'utilisation durable de cette biodiversité. Pour la République du Tchad, la prise en compte dans les projets de décision de l'évaluation des relations des communautés locales avec la biodiversité et de leur connaissance de la biodiversité est une condition préalable de l'élaboration des stratégies efficaces de gestion de la biodiversité. À cet effet, nous exhortons le comité directeur scientifique sur la biodiversité et les changements climatiques de l'IPBES-GIEC d'intégrer cette variable dans la poursuite de leurs travaux. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chad. Netherlands, followed by Benin and Lebanon.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Mr. Chair. The Netherlands would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the note on biodiversity and climate change. The Netherlands recognizes the interlinkages between climate change and biodiversity and stresses that climate change is one of the main drivers of biodiversity loss. At the same time, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, and sustainable use of biodiversity contribute to climate mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction. Nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches have enormous potential to tackle multiple challenges and crises in conjunction and to support sustainable development. It is essential that we adopt a holistic approach in which synergies between biodiversity and climate change are maximized to effectively implement the GBF, as well as the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. As such, the Netherlands supports strengthened cooperation between IPBES and IPCC, between the CBD and UNFCCC, as well as strengthened integrated approaches at the national level, such as NBCEPs, national determined commitments, and national adaptation plans. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Netherlands. Now, Benin, followed by Lebanon and Norway.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le Bénin soutient la déclaration faite par les Swatini au nom du groupe Afrique sur le document sous examen. Le Bénin soutient également la déclaration du Japon et de la Belgique dans leur vision sur les solutions fondées sur la nature comme élément du développement durable. Le Bénin félicite la Convention pour cet esprit d'ouverture sur les changements climatiques à travers plusieurs cibles dans le cadre mondial sur la biodiversité commémoriale, notamment les cibles 8 et 11 et consorts, qui appellent à réduire au minimum les effets des changements climatiques et de l'acidification des océans sur la biodiversité et renforcer la résilience de celle-ci grâce à des mesures d'atténuation et d'adaptation. Le Bénin soutient les solutions basées sur la nature et les approches écosystémiques pour lutter contre les effets des changements climatiques pour un réel développement durable. Le Bénin estime que le développement durable n'est point possible sans les approches écosystémiques et les solutions basées sur la nature, au vu des actions agricoles de pêche et de sylviculture pratiquées par la majorité des populations au Bénin. Le Bénin estime qu'il est par contre urgent que ce concept soit suffisamment clarifié dans le contexte de la CDB. Le Bénin propose qu'il soit élaboré des lignes directrices très claires avec des indicateurs capables d'être opérationnalisés dans le contexte de la biodiversité en lien avec les solutions basées sur la nature pour renforcer le présent document. Le Bénin a déjà envoyé ses commentaires au secrétariat. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Benin. Now, Lebanon, followed by Norway and Costa Rica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lebanon welcomes the note by the CBD Secretariat on Biodiversity and Climate Change in documents CBD Substar-25/12 and the proposed recommendations to the COP16, which will set the means to support the implementations of Targets 8 and 11 of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which address biodiversity and climate change, as well as other targets that support this topic, such as the targets 1, 2, 3, and 10 that directly contribute to adaptation to and mitigation of climate change. We welcome specifically that the draft decision to the COP16 on biodiversity and climate change recognizes that achievement of the Paris Agreement and the GBF are interdependent and calls for synergies and coherence between national climate and biodiversity strategies, action plans, and commitments. Thus, we strongly support the text of paragraph 2, stating that the achievement of the goals and mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework is not possible without urgent and effective action on climate change in line with the Paris Agreement, and the text of paragraph 4b calling the parties to integrate nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptations, mitigation, and disaster risk reduction into the revised MBSAPs and relevant national targets, and to ensure synergies with other national planning processes, including existing, new, and updated national determined contributions and national adaptation plans as appropriate. However, we suggest to add a text to the draft decision requesting the CBD Secretariat to coordinate directly with the UNFCCC Secretariat in order to develop guidelines to ensure synergies between the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Paris Agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebanon. Now, Norway, Costa Rica, and India.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to see that the decision text clearly recognizes that biodiversity loss, climate change, desertification, and land degradation are inseparable and interdependent crises that must be addressed in an integrated manner, and also that we cannot achieve the goals and targets in our global framework without urgent and efficient action on climate change. This message corresponds with the findings of the IPBES Global Assessment referring to the 25th division of the CBD and how we will not be able to reach this without action in line with the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. The 6th assessment report from the IPCC offers the best available scientific evidence and information on the connection between climate and biodiversity, and Norway supports welcoming the report as part of the decision text. Nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches offer benefits for conserving biodiversity while simultaneously buffering against the effects of climate. It is also a cost-effective tool acknowledged in both Action Targets 8 and 11. Parties should be encouraged to integrate these elements in their MBSAPs and other relevant processes. We believe UNEA Resolution 55 on nature-based solutions is instrumental in our common understanding of what nature-based solutions are and the safeguards to be applied. We therefore support Para 7 on guidance on the application of nature-based solutions in the context of the CBD, with some minor changes in line with suggestions provided by New Zealand and Canada. We support the suggestion from the EU and the UK requesting the Executive Secretary to update the CBD guidelines for ecosystem-based approaches to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction, with an addendum on nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches for climate mitigation. Lastly, as mentioned in our intervention under Agenda Item 4, the IPCC report, we would like to see some of the findings and recommendations reflected in this decision as well. Text suggestions will be submitted in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now, Costa Rica, followed by India and Italy.
Gracias, señor presidente. La Agenda 2030, acordada por Naciones Unidas en el año 2015, es un marco de trabajo que establece 3 dimensiones para el desarrollo: lo económico, lo social y lo ambiental. Esta agenda define las prioridades para el desarrollo sostenible a nivel mundial. Una característica de la agenda es su búsqueda de interrelaciones e indivisibilidad que promueva la intersectorialidad. Por ello, Costa Rica considera que una manera de contribuir con esa invisibilidad es aceptar la estrecha relación entre la acción climática, entendida esta por adaptación, mitigación, resiliencia y reducción del riesgo, y la pérdida de biodiversidad, y promover arreglos concretos, tales como soluciones basadas en la naturaleza. Por ello, deseamos proponer un nuevo párrafo de recomendación a la Conferencia de las Partes en el tema de biodiversidad y cambio climático, que se lea de la siguiente forma. Se alienta a las partes para que bajo el marco de las metas 8 y 11 del Marco Mundial CUMI-Montreal se continúe trabajando hacia el mejor entendimiento de las soluciones basadas en la naturaleza, especialmente lo relativo a estándares y criterios. Esto por ser uno de los temas que durante las consultas globales sobre soluciones basadas en naturaleza, realizadas la semana pasada, hubo consenso general sobre profundizar más, ya que la definición quedó claramente plasmada en la resolución 5/5 en UNEA 5. Gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias, Costa Rica. Ahora, India, Italia y la última parte es la Federación Rusa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. India supports the global strategies that have been adopted to address biodiversity and climate change, but must take into account national circumstances and capabilities, as well as principles such as common but differentiated responsibilities. India is implementing the National Action Plan on Climate Change through 8 national missions which focus on solar energy, enhanced energy efficiency, sustainable habitat, water, Himalayan ecosystem, Green India, sustainable agriculture, and strategic knowledge for climate change. India welcomes the voluntary guidelines for the design and effective implementation of ecosystem-based approach to climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction for consideration by UNFCCC. India stands in support of the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services of the IBIS. Also, we welcome the special reports of the IPCC. Target 8 of the framework calls for the minimization of the impact of climate change and ocean acidification on biodiversity and the increase of its resilience through mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction actions, including through nature-based solutions and or ecosystem-based approaches, while minimizing negative and fostering positive impacts of climate action on biodiversity. India has also started preparing National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan to achieve the targets outlined by KMGBF. India would try to bring convergence between National Climate Plan and National Biodiversity Plan with an aim to bring synergy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, India. Now Italy, followed by Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Italy would like to support the statements made by European Union, Spain, and many other parties about the role that ecosystem-based approaches and nature-based solutions have on addressing climate change mitigation and adaptation and biodiversity loss. Italy warmly thanks the co-chair, the Secretariat, and the parties that contributed to the consultations and shed light on the standards and criteria of the tools defined as nature-based solutions. In this regard, Italy underlines that the definition of nature-based solutions approved by UNEA 5 is clear and does not require further clarification. The definition provides for standards and criteria that allow the development of projects and plans that aim to protect, sustainably use and manage, as well as restore all types of natural or modified ecosystems. These projects and plans address at the same time social, economic, and environmental challenges. This definition is a crucial prerequisite to guide the choices of governments, businesses, and civil society towards projects and plans that pursue the objectives of minimizing the impact of climate change on biodiversity, increasing biodiversity resilience through mitigation, adaptation, and disaster risk reduction, and promoting the positive impacts of climate action on biodiversity. The UNEA definition allows excluding projects that are more nature-based problems than solutions. Italy believes that the UNEA 5 definition is the best possible tool to achieve Target 8 and the other pertinent targets of the GBF. Lastly, Italy wants also to underline that many nature-based solutions allow to further mobilize climate finance in favor of biodiversity. We would like to see all above reflected in the draft recommendation, and we will send our written proposal to the Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair, also for your patience.
Grazie, Italy. Now, Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Постараюсь коротко. Присоединяемся ко всем странам, поддержавшим ранее продолжение работы в этой области и продолжение взаимодействия между ИБЭС и IPCC для совместного решения задач в области и климата, и биоразнообразия. Много было сказано, поэтому буквально по двум параграфам. В параграфе 4, пункте С, в конце предложения мы бы добавили в том числе при пересмотре и обновлении своих национальных стратегий и планов действий. Что касается параграфов 7 и 8, мы полностью разделяем позиции, высказанные ранее Бразилией и Эсватини от имени региона Африки. Мы также сожалеем, что вопрос решений, основанных на природе, рассматривается нами в очень узком ключе, собственно, в контексте изменений климата только, так как мы полагаем, что это важный инструмент и может быть применим с успехом для решения иных задач, в том числе социальных и прежде всего в областях биоразнообразия. Надеемся, что дальнейшая межгосударственная работа по четкому определению, что именно включают природные решения, для общего, единообразного и недискриминационного использования всеми сторонами позволит существенно продвинуться и в решении задач глобальной рамочной программы, и многих целей устойчивого развития. Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Russian Federation. With this, we finish with interventions from parties. I will give the floor to a few observers. Please be very succinct, hopefully less than 2 minutes. I'll give the floor to IPLC's representative 225.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For indigenous peoples and local communities, there's a definite linkage between climate change and biodiversity. It's experienced every day on the ground in communities in different parts of the globe. We therefore are in support of this type of discussion between climate change and biodiversity within the framework and the various targets that are in the framework, and that needs to be emphasized most definitely. So I'll cut to our particular requests for additional text just to consider consistency of the language. So in paragraph 4, recommendations in subparagraph A, we'd like to add in the following text where the line reads, in particular for vulnerable ecosystems and other ecosystems that are irreplaceable, and insert indigenous peoples and local communities and other stakeholders. End of insert. That ends the sentence that directly depend on biodiversity. On paragraph 5, we'd like to insert where the paragraph begins, encourages parties, other governments, and to insert IPLCs and other relevant organizations. Also to further insert at the end of paragraph 5 where the line says, and other effective area-based conservation measures, and add in the text, and indigenous and traditional territories. We've submitted our statement to the Secretariat along with these recommendations, and we hope to have support from the parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to see if there are parties supporting these suggestions. Please raise your hand. I see one hand. Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to UNDRR.
Thank you, Chair. UNDR would like to reiterate the role of disaster risk reduction for achieving Target 8 and 11 and the inherent link with climate and biodiversity issues. These interlinkages are also referenced in the CBD COP decision 14/5 that encourages parties to foster coherent, integrated, and co-beneficial implementation of relevant international framework, including the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The UN General Assembly Political Declaration of the high-level meeting on the recent midterm review of the Sendai Framework calls on member states to strengthen comprehensive disaster risk governance, including by promoting nature-based solution, ecosystem-based approaches, as well as mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in the implementation of policy areas related to biodiversity and the environment. We would like to highlight 4 entry points that are aligned with the priorities of the Sendai Framework: data and information on the impact on ecosystems, enhanced risk understanding, nature-based solution as connector and strengthen comprehensive risk governance and management, enhanced risk-informed investments for greater resilience, including natural infrastructure, and the role of nature-based solutions in preparedness and the application of building back better. UNDR takes note of existing voluntary guidelines and sets ready to support the development of new, updated, and complementary guidance and tools as called by the parties to enhance coherence, complementarity, and synergy. Thank you.
Thank you. IUCN, followed by Ramsar.
Gracias, señor presidente. IUCN generally supports... There's no mic.
The mic is with Ramsar.
Oh, so go ahead first.
Chair, with your permission, and in the interest of time, biodiversity and climate change are inextricably interlinked and have to be addressed in an integrated manner. At least 9 conventional wetlands COP resolutions from our last 4 COPs directly address wetlands and climate change, including their role in mitigation, adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and water security, and encompassing a range of actions, guidance, and tools. Regarding the recommendations on biodiversity and climate change in document 2512, we would therefore like to make the following suggestions. In paragraph 41, subparagraph 4.4, under item B, in relation to ensuring synergies with other national planning processes, we recommend adding relevant national planning processes of other biodiversity-related conventions and coordination with their respective national focal points. Under item C, in relation to tools and guidance, we recommend including consideration of tools and guidance of other biodiversity-related conventions. In relation to subparagraph 4.5, it's important to consider climate change in planning and implementing ecosystem restoration, and we therefore suggest including reference to target 2 of the KMGBF. In subparagraph 4.8, we recommend adding reference to the liaison group of the biodiversity-related conventions. We draw attention to the ongoing work by the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Conventional Wetlands in relation to climate change and wetlands. This includes development of tools that support integration of wetlands action in climate change planning frameworks. We recognize the need for further in-depth analysis of the multiple current and future impacts of climate change on ecosystem health, function, and distribution, and their implications for the role of ecosystems in climate regulation and in the hydrological cycle. In this regard, we encourage further collaboration between IPBES and IPCC and with the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Conventional Wetlands. Chair, these suggestions will be submitted in writing. Thank you.
If an observer is making suggestions to include text, you should be very careful if it's 1, 2, 3, and consider that it could be difficult for parties to identify if they agree with all suggestions. So please save your bullets to be clear if you want to get support, because sometimes can be confusing to propose many changes to different paragraphs, and maybe parties cannot track all of them. Ramsar made many suggestions. I hope parties could follow up. So I would like to see if there is support to what Ramsar mentioned. I see Switzerland. Thank you very much. So same advice for further observers. Please be very succinct. Now, microphone back to IUCN, please.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN generally supports the draft recommendation under this agenda item. As Gabon, Korea, and many others, we underline the importance of considering climate change beyond the implementation of targets 8 and 11. For instance, in paragraph 5, existing and projected impacts of climate change on biodiversity should also be considered when implementing targets 2 and 4. Chair, further guidance could be developed and/or collected to assist parties, especially concerning how to avoid and mitigate negative impacts of climate change responses, such as when deploying renewable energy measures, and how to integrate nature-based solutions and/or ecosystem-based approaches in NBSAPs. Regarding NBS, as mentioned by Germany, Cook Islands, and several parties before us, IUCN reiterates that they must not be used either as a substitute for or as a means to postpone ambitious reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that science tells us are required today. We invite parties to use the IUCN Global Standard for Nature-Based Solutions. Its application is essential to guard against unanticipated negative outcomes and/or misuse, and help all actors to assess the effectiveness of interventions. Finally, Chair, IUCN recommends conducting a rapid analysis of the Biodiversity and Climate Change Program by SBSTTA-25 to identify gaps in guidance needed for the integration of climate considerations in the implementation of the GBF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IUCN. I will give the floor to Women Representative 266, followed by Youth 706.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Cecilia Githaiga from Kenya, speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. Women, change actors, 50% of the global population, experience disproportionate impacts of climate change. They play vital roles that must be valued, supported through legal, technical, and functional capacities backed by adequate and consistent funding. We propose the following adjustments. To para 4, after the words framework to provide that the actions proposed should be undertaken, add, in line with the human rights, including the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, women's rights to land and resources, and agreed conclusions of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women. And after the words with the full and effective participation of, add, all stakeholders, particularly those whose livelihoods largely depend on biodiversity, including indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 4A, add at the end, particularly indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 4B, delete reference to greenhouse gas cuts, and after nationally determined contributions, add climate change action plans and strategies. At paragraph 4C, at the end, add gender plan of action. At paragraph 5, add the words impact, after the words impacts of climate change, add indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At paragraph 7, add assess the impacts, at paragraph 7, add to assess the impacts after the word sustainable development, and add prioritizing permanent emissions reducing proposals. Between paragraph 5 and 6, add bis, request parties at COP16 to reaffirm the precautionary principles on geoengineering by affirming decision X/338W. We request parties to support our proposals. Thank you, Chair.
I will ask if there is support. There were many suggestions. I hope you were able to find, you know very well the document and all paragraphs. I'd like to see hands if they support this, many proposals. I don't see, yes, I see hands there. Thank you very much. Now, last two interventions are from Youth 706, followed by CBD Alliance 244.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We are concerned that nature-based solutions are already being implemented in ways that endanger biodiversity and threaten indigenous people and local communities, and agree with proposals by Mexico, Sweden, Finland, and others for strong social and environmental safeguards and a human rights-based approach on nature-based solutions. We also continue to express deep concerns about biodiversity offsetting, which is a false solution with strong evidence that it does not deliver on biodiversity outcomes. We call for a process to compile the best available evidence on the impact of carbon and biodiversity offsets and other market-based approaches on biodiversity. We therefore propose the following new paragraph to come after the existing paragraphs that reads, also requests the Executive Secretary to compile studies and evidence on the implications of carbon and biodiversity offsets and other market-based approaches to biodiversity, and to make this available to SBSTTA prior to COP17. We support the deletion of paragraph 7 as proposed by Venezuela, DRC, and others, as well as references to the precautionary principle. Finally, we highlight the need for synergetic approaches to biodiversity and climate change financing to avoid double counting and achieve Target 19E of the KMGBF. We request party support for these proposals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ask countries and parties if there is support to suggestions by previous speaker. I don't see hands. I see one hand there. Thank you. Last intervention from CBD Alliance, 244.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. Right now, ecosystems are collapsing under the impacts of climate change, and some climate policies pose even more threats to biodiversity. But the proposed SBSTTA recommendation lacks urgency and might fail to address these impacts. Therefore, we kindly request party support for the inclusion of the following elements. 1, a request to the Secretariat to compile studies, practices, and perspectives on the adverse impacts of climate-focused interventions on biodiversity, including on carbon and biodiversity offsetting, biomass projects, and geoengineering. 2, to include in paragraph 5, after the words, projected impacts of climate change, the additional following words, and climate-related policies. 3, a request to the Secretariat to compile best practices on measures to reduce the impact of climate change on biodiversity. 4, add in paragraph 6 a call for investments in biodiversity action to protect and restore ecosystems damaged by climate change. 5, request financial support for implementing ecosystem-based approaches, ensuring that equitable considerations alongside NBS. 6, a paragraph reaffirming the precautionary principle and decision 10/338W in view of the increase of risky geoengineering proposals and field experiments. 7, include a paragraph to address the interaction of social, racial, intergenerational, and gender inequalities with climate-related biodiversity impacts. We seek party support for these recommendations for all these elements or separately. Finally, we support the deletion of paragraph 7 as requested or proposed by some parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there support from parties to what observer expressed? I see some hands. Thank you very much. With this, we finish deliberations on this topic. I know there are some parties still requesting the floor, but I close the list. After hearing these interventions, I propose to establish a contact group to further work on the conclusions on the recommendations to the Conference of the Parties. A shared text will be developed for use in this group. The group will be facilitated by Ms. Tia Stevens of Australia and Ms. Mariela Canepa Montalvo from Peru. The contact group will be tasked to finalize the draft recommendations, and the time will be for tomorrow morning. And I will ask you to be very concise. We heard a lot. There are 8 paragraphs. To put all pieces together, separate, leave for the COP to decide on political matters, to have clarity, what is about funding, what is about collaboration with IPCC, with IPBES, and to consider mitigation, adaptation, restoration, the issue of nature-based solutions, the issue of ecosystem-based approaches, the issue of considering different ecosystems, to have clarity in different elements. Where there is no agreement, leave this to COP to decide, but at least to have as clear as possible the text. and I hope to see real scientific and technical support in how to move forward to address climate change and biodiversity loss. We heard a lot. Many things were repetitive, many things were opposite. We should be inclusive and to leave the elements as clear as possible in different segments so we can have clarity in how to move forward. And for those elements where definitely is not an agreement, to leave clearly identified. I wish you all the best, and I hope these 8 paragraphs can be clear with some additions and to get a good document. Thank you very much. We have very limited time. It's now, we have about half an hour, and I would like to move forward to next agenda item to consider conference room papers. So let's move to conference room paper 1 on item 3D on plant conservation. Now, I propose to begin our discussion on this. The CRP1 was prepared on the basis of the 26 interventions made on Sunday afternoon and Monday morning. We had a very rich discussion, and based on all the available input, with the Secretary and I produced a compromise text with the support of the Secretariat. As we heard from the, can you please remain in silence? We need to get the best use of the half an hour we have. So if you need to have conversations, please outside the room. As we heard from the presentation by the Global Partnership on Plant Conservation, please, colleagues, remain in silence, please. People there near Georgia, Germany, please, can you remain in silence, please? The voluntary complementary actions were developed to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. They have undergone a peer review and are supported by Information Note 4, which provide the rationales and additional information for each of the proposed actions. As we consider the CRP today, I will urge you to keep in mind that we already have available in relation to the global strategy for plant conservation, and to consider keeping the actions clear and succinct rather than repeating text that is already in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Before I open the floor, I would like to invite the Secretariat to announce some editorial clarifications on this document. So, Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. First, regarding the citation of adopted decisions, I'd like to inform you that the Secretariat is in the process of bringing CBD decisions in line with the way UN resolution, such as that of the General Assembly, ECOSOC, and Security Council, among others, are written. This is the reason that the date of adoption of decisions are being added after decisions are cited. When citing an adopted decision, the date of adoption will be provided at first mention, whether in the preamble or the operative part. When the date is not readily available or clearly indicated in the session report, the last day of the session will be used, as it is usually the day on which resolutions are adopted. Secondly, there are 2 editorial corrections to be made for this document. Please note a correction that should be made in document CRP1 in the annex, action 4D. At the end of the paragraph, the reference to the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture should read as follows. After the word potential, it read, taking into account the relevant frameworks and plans of action developed under the Commission on Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Full stop. Additionally, please note that all references to nature-based solution and/or ecosystem-based approaches will be adjusted throughout the document for consistency. As agreed in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, it will be and/or. This applies to Action 8B and 11 of the Annex. The Secretary will make the necessary corrections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, I would like to open the floor, and thanks to Secretariat that helped to take into account most of the comments, trying to have a balance and in consideration, and this is in general for all documents being prepared as a CRP, is not exactly including everything, but it's a try to have a balance and a consideration and interpretation of different views, what we have. And remember that these are complementary actions. Some of the actions were not touched because there were no comments on that. This applies to, for example, 3B or 7 or on 16 or 18 or target 19, 20, 21A. So those were not requests to be changed. So I invite you for not to introduce any changes. So I invite you first to work on the annex, because this is to see if suggestions to complementary actions are adequately reflecting the additions we have in CRP 1. So I would like to start with target 1, with complementary actions in target 1, if the text we have is acceptable. If there is any comment, please request to the floor. I see Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the end of item 1, we would like to add, while respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples in line with the target language. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can you repeat this at dictation speed?
Thank you, Chair. At the end of number 1, we would like to add, while respecting the rights of Indigenous peoples in line with the target language. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any objection to language suggested by Canada? Please raise your hand. Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, it was not an objection to the language raised by Canada, but I would just like to say that we think the Secretariat did a very good job in this document, and we all know how hard it is to balance all suggestions. And we do have, there are a few of our proposals that were incorporated at this document, but still we could live with that as it is. So my suggestion would be maybe if we could make a round with the other delegations and see if people can live with the document as it is, knowing that it's not perfect. we would, if we are to open it, and of course we're going to have suggestions on several items, but we can live with the document as it is. So if other delegations can live with that, maybe it could be a way forward. Thank you. Otherwise, I reserve my right to make comments on that, on number 1, because I do have proposal on number 1 that were incorporated in the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil, and thank you for this very good suggestion. So I would like then, following this recommendation, to see if we can live with the document as a whole. You are referring the recommendation and the annexes in the understanding that was a very good effort from the Secretariat to compile these recommendations, and also to remind that these complementary actions were already through a process of peer review and a lot of work. Is any objection to consider CRP1 as a whole? That can be a very good precedent to move forward. I see no objections, then we can adopt this document as it is. Thank you very much. Wow, that's very relieving. Now, with this, I propose now we take up document CRP2 on findings from the assessment by IPBES and their implications on the work for the convention, but in particular, well, the first reading of the pre-session document on 16 October, we had the opportunity to listen to intervention of 34 parties and 3 observers. And the recommendations relate to the assessment on the invasive species, sustainable wildlife, you know, and biodiversity, climate change, and in particular, the assessment on values for the successful implementation of the convention. So document CRP2 is specific to this one. And as I said before, we will address invasive species together in the specific document, also sustainable use and climate change. So this document is in particular for the assessment on values, on the methodological assessment report on the diverse values and valuation of nature of the IPBES and their implication of the work under our convention. So I would like to open for consideration this document. I think the discussion was very straightforward with the support of my colleague Marina. So I'd like to open the floor for comments on CRP2. I have Brazil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And sorry for taking the floor and somewhat breaking the nice spirit that we had in the anterior item. But unfortunately, we have problems with CRP2 and CRP3. Contrary to CRP1, which I believe, as I said, the Secretariat did an excellent job of balancing everyone's suggestions, we didn't see any of our suggestions reflected either on CRP2 or either on CRP3, which raises some concerns with us, because this is the second time that this happened in this very week. It has already happened in the document concerning item 3.A, and we requested the document to be revised, and that's why we started discussions on the contact group on a second version, because the second version, a second version needed to be made to incorporate our comments that were incorporated in the first version, and we had exactly the same problem I called attention on this matter earlier on today to the Secretariat and also to you, sir, but so far we haven't seen any second version of these two documents, and we have provided many detailed comments on these two. So I think we're not in a position unfortunately, to advance on the negotiations of these two documents if we don't see our comments reflected on that. So I would kindly request the Secretariat to prepare a new version of CRP 2 and 3, as I have done before earlier today. I have requested precisely that so that we could avoid the situation that we are coming here right now. So without a revised version, I feel it wouldn't be adequate to reflect, because maybe other countries also didn't have their comments reflected, I don't know, but certainly Brazilian comments weren't reflected in both documents. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brazil. Argentina.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. De acuerdo con la reciente intervención de Brasil, también vemos con mucha preocupación que ninguno de los comentarios remitidos a la Secretaría en el día de ayer han sido incluidos en la versión que estamos discutiendo en este momento. Asimismo, entendemos que varios de esos comentarios fueron replicados por otras partes durante las discusiones en el plenario, por lo que estimamos que al menos deberían haber sido considerados de una forma más balanceada. Coincidimos en un todo en la opinión de Brasil sobre el documento y nos gustaría ver reflejados nuestros comentarios y los de otras partes que pudieran tener similares preocupaciones. Gracias.
Gracias, Argentina. Bueno, ciertamente escuché el acercamiento por parte de Brasil en la mañana cuando estaba sesionando el grupo de contacto sobre especies invasoras. Tuve una conversación con la Secretaría. Hay que tomar en cuenta que no necesariamente para hacer un documento CRP incluye absolutamente todas, y justamente lo que se intenta es buscar un texto balanceado. Entiendo que se está trabajando en el caso de especies invasoras y además después de el buen resultado de tener los anexos limpios, se está trabajando en una versión completa, tomando en cuenta esto. Entonces yo espero que tengamos una versión revisada del documento 3. No había escuchado en particular sobre el documento CRP 2. Déjenme hacer una consulta con la Secretaría, pero también los invito a que si hay la voluntad de aprovechar los minutos que nos quedan para identificar. Es un documento corto. Si ustedes están dispuestos a revisar dónde se pueden incorporar estos elementos, quizá podamos hacer avances importantes en este documento. Así es que los invito a considerar esta opción en lo que consulto también a la Secretaría. Me gustaría ver si es posible incorporar estos elementos que quizá no fueron capturados apropiadamente para tener un documento balanceado. Lo pongo en la mesa, denme mientras un minuto, y ustedes también. Invito a Brasil y a Argentina a considerar, y quizá podemos aprovechar ahorita para insertar esto y que el documento quede a satisfacción de las partes. Gracias. Thank you for your patience. I touched base with the Secretariat on the suggestions that were not clearly reflect. So I invite, if there is a will, we can try to put back these elements. When I think there are two very concrete, one from Argentina and Brazil. This is a short document. Maybe we can together solve it in the next few minutes. And while being process CRP 3. If there is a will, we can go paragraph by paragraph. Secretariat identify these proposals, and I think we can move forward if there is a will. You agree? If this is the case, I would like to I believe the suggestions are in paragraph 3 and in paragraph 7C. So maybe we can pass through the document. When we reach to this, we can consider these elements to capture properly and to see if we have an agreement. Otherwise, we mark the different elements and send for the L version to be hopefully solved. I hope won't be any problem on this. Since we know those are on those paragraphs, I would like to ask if there are any comments on page 1 that is considering is the preambular section on the Conference of the Parties. Please raise your hand if there is any comment on page 1. Then we will go to paragraph by paragraph. I see Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one on that preamble. On the fourth sentence, we believe it might be just a typo and a copy-paste mistake. We believe that after emphasizing also, we should delete the call in target 14 and replace that by emphasis also that target 14 of the framework calls for the full integration of biodiversity. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Lux is editorial. Thank you, Canada. I hope it's clear. If there are no more comments on page 1, let's move to page 2, paragraph 1. Japan.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to make a comment to add the paragraph after para 2. Is it the right time to this comment?
I was going paragraph by paragraph. I ask you to wait a little bit.
Okay.
And then I have Brazil on paragraph 1.
Thank you, Chair. And in line with our written comments, in paragraph 1, we would suggest adding after the reference to the summary for policymakers at the third line, and its key messages, comma. And then we would suggest deleting the new paragraph 3, which reads, endorses the key messages. As we have highlighted from our perspective, the key messages are part of the summary for policymakers. And by disaggregating them into separate paragraph, it seems that we are placing them in a higher hierarchy than the summary for policymakers as a whole. So from our perspective, we would prefer to have them all together in paragraph 1, and we would then delete paragraph 3. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I see your point. So I'm wondering if the suggestions to welcomes with appreciation the assessment and the key messages, and to delete endorse the key messages. Is there any opposition to what Brazil suggests? I see Argentina, Russian Federation, and UK. I'm asking about the amendments proposed by Brazil. Argentina.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, señor presidente. concordamos con los cambios propuestos por Brasil y al mismo tiempo solicitaría eliminar la frase with appreciation para que lea welcomes the issuance of the methodological, y en lo sucesivo concordamos con los cambios propuestos por Brasil. Gracias.
Federación Rusa seguida de Reino Unido.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday, similar to Brazil, we actually made the same comment, requested to move language around key messages to paragraph 1. So we will leave with the option just proposed by Brazil. And we also agree with Argentina. In this case, we don't need paragraph 3, so we like to delete paragraph 3. And we also okay with the suggestion from Argentina for the beginning of this paragraph. Thank you.
Reino Unido.
Thank you very much, Chair. These key messages are the result of years of hard work from world-leading experts and the most rigorous scientific peer review process in the world. They're scientific facts. They've already been approved and accepted by around 140 countries, and we don't see that there is a reason for the COP not to endorse them. There is precedent for CBD endorsing IPBES key messages. For example, Decision 13/15 endorsed the key messages of the pollinators assessment. Decision 14/6 endorsed the key messages of the land degradation assessment and of the regional assessments. If the SBSTTA did not put an endorsement into this recommended decision, that would beg the question why those assessments were worth endorsing and this one isn't. Therefore, we'd like to keep the text as it currently remains. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to propose as a compromise if we use in paragraph 3, welcomes in brackets and endorse in brackets, not to move key messages to paragraph 1. So we welcome the issuance of the assessment and to leave for COP to decide this political issue so far. Can this be a way forward? Because I will listen to many interventions in both ends. Is anybody against that? Raise your hand. You are against. You do not agree, Peru? Peru, you have the floor.
Proposal, Mr. Chair.
So you support my proposal. So we retain paragraph 3 with starting with welcomes in brackets, then endorses with brackets the key messages. And on paragraph 1, welcomes, and there's a suggestion to put in brackets with appreciation the issuance and so on. Right? This is where we are in this CRP. Any other suggestion? I believe those are the main comments so far. Okay, with this, I would like to hear comments on this. If there are more comments on paragraph 1, 2, or 3, if not, move to paragraph 4. I see Russian Federation, UK, and Brazil. I hope you want still talking about what I referred in previous paragraph. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Chair. So if you suggest the way you did, where in paragraph 3 you suggest to have 2 square brackets, keeping endorsed and keeping welcome, similar logic in this case in paragraph 1, we keep and its key messages in square brackets as well in this case. And of course, we fully appreciate that our colleagues in UK, they're living in a precedent law system for centuries. So, and it's very dear for them precedents, but we have also other options, and we can at every COP decide what we want and the way we want. So that's not really being bound by anything in the previous times. So if we keep it and we also add square brackets around the entire paragraph 3, so then we can proceed as you suggested. Thank you.
I understand there was a suggestion to include key messages in paragraph 1 that can be in brackets. The idea is not to fool the document with brackets, so I kindly request my colleague from the Russian Federation if we can just leave paragraph 3 with these 2 brackets in welcomes and endorse, but not the whole paragraph. Just to leave this clarity to the COP. I don't see why we need to bracket the whole thing. But I'm in your hands. Can you leave just to leave welcome and endorses, Russian Federation? Microphone to Russia.
Chair, my apologies, but I mean, with the negotiation logic, unfortunately, we should ask for square brackets around this paragraph because it's all connected, yeah? So, and then it depends on other elements, because if it stays endorses, we don't want this paragraph at all. So, and the same whether the key messages will survive in paragraph 1 or not, that also will affect the decision on paragraph 3, so that's why I ask the whole paragraph in square brackets. Thank you.
Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. We would support the comment made by Russia, and in paragraph 2, we would have another suggestion of change in the 5th line after the Convention on Biological Diversity, comma, the Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We would suggest replace this with the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as the GBF has been adopted under the Convention, which provides the foundation for its strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. This is an editorial the amendment that I don't believe is any problem, and it's Cumming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you. So we have the amendments in paragraph 1 and in paragraph 3 with brackets. I will ask Secretary later to read how, with these changes, how it looks like, but in the spirit to move on and that we have a few minutes, I will ask for comments on paragraph 4. I see no request from parties. Paragraph 5. I see no request. Paragraph, yes, Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 5, we would suggest replacing in particular at the 4th line with including. As we understand, there are multiple pathways to make use of the information contained in the assessment, and not necessarily only through the NAB SAPs, so we would prefer a less prescriptive language. Thank you.
Any objection to suggestion by Brazil, UK?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies, this is a comment relating to the previous suggestion from Brazil. We have no problems linking the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework, but instead of saying it's, we would prefer to say agreed under the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, agreed under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Thank you.
Brazil, can you agree with suggestion from UK? I see noting. Thank you very much. So it would say the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework agreed under CBD, right? Thank you. So it's clarity on drafting, on redaction on paragraph 2. Now, there's an amendment on paragraph 5. I didn't see any objection. Now, comments on paragraph 6. Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. En el párrafo 6, en la línea 4, sugerimos cambiar el término invites por urges, para que lea and urges developed country parties, other parties, and other governments in a position to do so, as well as relevant organizations to provide support to developing countries in this regard, y a continuación solicitamos incluir including through finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Argentina. So invites by urges, and at the end, including capacity building, finance, capacity building, and technology transfer. Can we agree with these suggestions? I see no objections. Thank you very much. Now, paragraph 7. I see Argentina.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Para el párrafo 7 sugerimos que la primera parte del párrafo lea also encourages parties to take into account the findings of the assessments when implementing the convention according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, to take as appropriate and in accordance to relevant international obligations. Y a continuación, eliminar el listado que parece redundante. Muchas gracias.
Argentina, ¿puede volver a leer la redacción? Y lo que está diciendo es eliminar los incisos A, B, C y D. Y ¿puede volver a leer cómo quiere que diga el encabezado del párrafo 7, por favor?
Encourages parties to take into account the findings of the assessments when implementing the convention according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, as appropriate and in accordance to relevant international obligations.
Do we agree with the amendments proposed by Argentina on paragraph 7? Including deletion of subparagraphs from A to D. I see no objections. I see UK followed by Sweden, UK, and EU.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to retain A, B, C, D. We may be flexible to reformulate 7, but we really would like to keep these elements. That would be a quite radical reduction. It wasn't proposed in the non-paper CRP before, so that's why we would like to keep it. Thank you.
Thank you. UK?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the comments just made by Sweden. I think the role of this agenda item is to consider the findings and its implications for the convention. So while obviously we'd be very supportive of taking into account the findings, we think A, B, C, and D are quite important to pick out specific ways in which parties can do that in a way that furthers the work of this convention. So we would like to keep these in, although, as Sweden says, we can be flexible on working on the language. Thank you.
Thank you very much. EU?
Thank you, Chair. EU supports the intervention of UK and Sweden. Thank you.
Brazil?
Thank you, Chair. we share some of the concerns that were raised by Argentina. We do think that some of the options outlined in A to C seem overly prescriptive or are out of the scope of the convention. For instance, especially 7C on reforming policies, institutions, and norms and societal goals. From our perspective, this is under the mandate of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development rather than CBD. We would suggest perhaps as a way forward is to retain the chapeau as proposed by Argentina. And if you are to retain A to C, we would suggest the following amendments. In 7A, we would suggest adding after diverse values of nature, comma, while recognizing that given the diversity of social, economic, and ecological contexts, there is no one-size-fits-all valuation method, and available valuation methods may be adapted to address local realities. And this is exactly agreed language from the summary for policymakers, so I believe it shouldn't raise any concern, but it just highlights that there are different evaluation methods available. And in paragraph C, we would suggest deleting the original paragraph C and replacing it with the following amendment, the following alternate text. Support participatory processes to promote different sustainability pathways. We understand this will be more consistent with Goal D of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So perhaps this could be a good way forward to try to accommodate all the concerns that were raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And certainly to have the subparagraphs from A to D are providing details of the work of this assessment. I see that in particular for many developing countries, the consideration of different values more than economic is very important. So there's a lot of work here and merit from my point of view. So I invite you to be flexible and to recognize the different elements. We might remember that IBE's slogan in some way is to produce policy relevant but not policy prescriptive advice. And for CBD, this also applies. And so there is a merit to maintain some of these elements. So I think it's to Brazil to propose some suggestions on A. Now it's an important change on C. I'm wondering about the time. We only have 5 minutes more on translation. And so I hope that with some of these amendments we can retain subparagraphs. I will request to Brazil to provide the language to include this by the Secretariat. I hope you are tracking all the changes. And I see Switzerland, Germany, and Mexico. Please go very quickly to decide how to move on.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Similar to Sweden and UK, we would like to retain the subparagraphs. And Mr. Chair, you know, already paragraph 7 says we encourage parties, according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, to take as appropriate. So I think there are already so many, you know, words that should not worry us in taking this advice. So in that sense, I don't understand the concerns, and we would like to keep as it was proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, and I invite you to be flexible on this. This is good advice to consider the multi-dimensions of biodiversity values. We've been fighting not to consider only the economic dimension, and this is open the opportunity to different values on biodiversity, which is important. As coming from as a developing country. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We concur with Switzerland that the chapeau of 7 whereas the word encourages says everything. It's nothing about being policy prescriptive. And I myself have witnessed the discussions we had in Bonn and IPES when we adopted that assessment, and we discussed about especially about the C, that how important what policies means, what institutions means, and I think the way it is captured here, it has always been part of a very important message from the assessment. So I would ask colleagues in the room that we can keep that and not reformulate it at that stage. Thank you very much.
Mexico, followed by Argentina.
Thank you, Chair. Mexico would agree with Germany and Sweden on retaining this paragraph. We also think that the chapeau of this is already very decaffeinated, so we don't need, something else. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Colombia, because we know the position of Argentina and Ghana, and we have just 3 minutes more of translation.
No, de Colombia solo apoyar que se mantenga el párrafo como está. Gracias.
Gracias, Colombia. Ghana.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to support Germany and the others that we retain the paragraph as it stands, because the various items gives a guide to the countries what to do. So we support it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Peru, and then go to Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. Igual Perú tiene la misma recomendación, que se mantenga el párrafo, bueno, todo el tema número 7, ¿no?
Gracias, Perú. Argentina, ayúdanos.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Con respecto a los subítems, podríamos aceptarlo con las reformulaciones propuestas por Brasil, y en caso de que se agregue en el párrafo 7 únicamente el chapeau in accordance to relevant international obligations.
Gracias por la flexibilidad. Supongo que Italia apoya las intervenciones anteriores. Ya veo que está. Permítanme un segundo para hacer una consulta rápida con la Secretaría. I would like to put for your consideration that since we will not have any more translation, interpreters need to rest, since we are close, as I see, to have a conclusion on this document, we can continue a few minutes just in English. Is there any objection? I see nodding. Thanks for your flexibility. So I would like to go through the remaining paragraphs, and then I will ask Secretary to read all changes to see if we can adopt the document. Thank you for your flexibility. So Argentina, regarding paragraph 7, we have a formulation in the chapeau, including the last intervention on this treaties, and with some amendments retaining the subparagraphs in paragraph 7. I do thank you to interpreters for your help. And now I open the floor for comments on paragraph 8. I see no requests on paragraph 8. Belgium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I hope you forgive me that I would like to go back a little bit on 7D, because there I read something which makes my linguistic feeling go wild. consider the suggestions made in the assessment to undertake the assessment of diverse values. I mean, we're never going to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, but this goes a bit far. So I would suggest some simplification here and just replace the first part, consider, to undertake to just say something along the lines of include or perform an assessment of diverse values when developing measures to support. Much shorter and, in my very humble opinion, sounds a lot better. Thank you.
Can you repeat?
Absolutely. So it would read, include/perform, whatever the room likes most, an assessment of diverse values when developing measures to support the implementation of Target 14 of the framework.
Thank you, Belgium. UK?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, could you please clarify what the status of 7A and C is going forwards?
I was waiting to go through 8, and then I will ask Secretary to read all changes one by one. I hope that's acceptable in order to make progress. Can you wait for that, UK? Who's UK? What is UK? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for noting. Brazil, followed by India.
Thank you, Chair. And regarding 7D, we would prefer to retain the regional phrasing. We do see that with the amendment proposed by Belgium, this would become overly prescriptive as countries would need to undertake an assessment of all the typologies of values as presented in the assessment. From our perspective, this would be assessed on a case-by-case basis when countries implement Target 14. We do notice that during the discussions of the IPA's assessment on the values assessment, there are many concerns about the typologies that were presented because they sometimes may not resonate with developing countries, especially IPLCs, because sometimes the distinctions between intrinsic relation and instrumental values might not actually work for IPLCs and for many local communities in developing countries. So that is why we would prefer more flexible language under paragraph D as proposed originally in the CRP. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. I can make one try. If not, with the indulgence of Belgium, we can go to original language. We could say, consider to undertake the assessment of diverse values. So it leaves the door open for this. Would that be acceptable, Brazil? I think goes more to leave, yeah, I see noting. Thank you so much. So this could be consider to undertake the assessment for diverse, because it sounds quite strange at the original. Thank you for your cooperation. Now I'd like to see if there are, India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for going back to 7C. I would like to suggest in the first start of the C para, chapeau, restructure institutions and reform policies. That is what I would like to suggest. Restructure institutions and reform policies, comma, and their underlying norms.
Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While I understand the proposal by India, remembering what we discussed at length at IPAS when we adopted the key messages to this assessment is that institutions doesn't mean a body. Institutions is more than an organization. For an organization, the firm restructure would fit, but institutions could also be a legal thing, a system of legal or norms, and this is why the word reform is the one we should keep here and retain here. Sorry that I can't concur with that.
I see. Can India consider these comments and maybe to retain the original language? Thank you, India, for your flexibility. So we keep as it is, but also there's a suggestion to have an alt to C proposed by Brazil. So with this, I see no more comments. I will ask the Secretariat to go through the document explaining the different changes where on relevant paragraphs, so maybe we can reach an agreement. So please, my friend. From the very beginning of the document, all changes proposed, starting with the last paragraph in page 1, emphasizing also that. That's it. So, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 1, recalling the preamble, there is no change. Recalling all the decisions, there is no change. Emphasizing the fact that the race value, there is no change. Emphasizing also that the call for in target 14 of the framework calls for the full integration of biodiversity and its multiple values.
Just a change.
All right. So there is no other change in that paragraph, just that. Page 2, operative paragraph 1, it's bracketed, open brackets, welcome, bracket with appreciation, close bracket, in insinuance of the methodological assessment.
No, I'm sorry. I think there's only brackets on with appreciation.
Okay.
And it's an insertion after services, and it's key messages, right? In brackets.
Yes,
That was suggested by Brazil. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, I see note in Brazil. Those are the changes on paragraph 1.
Paragraph 2, fifth line, it reads, implementation of the CUMI-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework agree under the Convention on Biological Diversity, including its goals and targets, and continue without change.
Good. Now paragraph 3.
Paragraph 3, bracket welcomes, bracket endorses, bracket, the key messages contained in summary for policymaker of assessment.
And the whole paragraph in brackets.
And the whole paragraph in brackets.
Paragraph 4, no changes.
Paragraph 4, no changes. Paragraph 5, changes in 4 line. Deletion of particular replaced by including through the update and revision.
Paragraph 6.
Paragraph 6. In the 3rd line, instead of invites, urges develop country parties. And at the end of the sentence, in this regard, comma, including through capacity building, finance, and technology transfer.
That's correct.
Paragraph 7, and give me 1 second here, I will get the copy from Brazil. Lisa, do you have it? You can read it.
I think Lisa can do it. I think she can.
That's a paragraph with more changes. My RAM memory is disappearing.
Thank you, Chair. So the changes to the chapeau of 7, which were made by Brazil, supported by other parties, were after capacities and circumstances to add, and in accordance with relevant international obligations. And that was the change to the chapeau.
Can you read how it reads with that the whole chapeau, please?
Yes, Chair. So the paragraph 7, the chapeau reads, also encourages parties, according to their national needs, capacities, and circumstances, and in accordance with relevant international obligations to take as appropriate steps to.
Thank you. Does that properly reflect Argentina? Argentina está de acuerdo? Okay, I see noting. Yes, now then we continue with subparagraphs A. There's one change there. Can you say?
Thank you, Chair. I'll read all of A, subpara A. Address the diverse values of nature in ongoing and new valuation processes, including as part of ecosystem assessments. And then there's a new assertion. While recognizing that given the diversity of social, economic, and ecological contexts, there is no one-size-fits-all valuation method, and available valuation methods may be adapted to address local realities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Subparagraph B. I think there's no change.
Subparagraph, there's no change.
Subparagraph C.
Subparagraph C. Brazil presented an alt to subparagraph C, which reads, support participatory processes to promote different sustainability pathways. Thank you, Chair.
Then D, we have a simpler version also. It would read, consider to undertake the assessment of diverse. So just strike out the suggestion made in the assessment, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
those are the main changes to the document. So can we adopt the document as amended in order to produce an L document? I see Germany and UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My recollection of our discussion was that there was very little to no support to the changes to C. I heard a lot of support or nothing against the changes in A, but no support to changing C. And we agreed we are taking a change in the chapeau. I think that's what is, at least is my recollection, and this is what I would support as for Germany. Thank you.
So can we retain C and C alt? Germany?
If you ask me if we keep both versions of C, then let's do that.
Okay, so we can have the two options and maybe see with fresh eyes on LDoc. UK?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're happy with that way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with this, I submit this document for adoption and in order to prepare an L document. I see no objection. Just in time. So I invite you to continue with the contact group on monitoring framework for those who still have energy and will to move forward with this spirit. Thank you very much. The plenary is adjourned.